Everybody, it's John Kraska with EveryLibrary. The EveryLibrary Institute is Award Winner Week 2025. Say that 10 times fast. We've got conversations happening all week with folks who are award winners for different kinds of genres, for the body of their work, mainly because we want you to be able to find interesting things to read and authors to connect with in advance of the holiday buying season. I'm serious about that. I want to make a market for new connections with great stories and storytellers. But libraries overall in this mix also, because one of the best things that a library can do is make a place. Make a place not only for the community to spend some time with itself, talking through big ideas, but make a place for those authors, those illustrators, those narrators, those creators who've done something that rises up a bit and deserves attention over the long haul. I mean, there's something nice to go to a bookshelf and find somebody based on the alphabet or based on the Dewey Decimal or the Library of Congress, but it's very interesting to me as a reader to go to a special kind of display and say, who else thought this was worth their time? And we have a very great way to start this conversation today with Ben Passmore, who's an award winner, the Eisner Award, the Ignatz Award. Ben, I really appreciate you being here today to talk about your most recent book, Black Arms to Hold You Up. But also I want to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to be an award winner and what it means to carry that kind of badge around. We always start our EveryLibrary Lives, Ben, with the official bio. Ben Passmore is the author of the ongoing comic book series Daygloayhole, as well as the Eisner Award nominated and Ignatz Award winning comic collection Your Black Friend. He also wrote and illustrated Sports is Hell and collaborated on BTTM FDRS and contributes to the publications such as the Nib and the New York Times. He lives in Philadelphia. Ben, thanks for being here today. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So congratulations on Black Arms to Hold You Up.
Thank you.
I had some physical reactions when I read your book and went through it. As a white fellow from the suburbs, there was times where my face got hot, where my pulse started to race, and little versions of the shame spiral that comes from being somebody who read Your Black Friend and understands from Your Black Friend that the thing that white people fear the most is making things awkward. Ben, you did it to me. Congratulations.
Thank you.
No, seriously. So bringing Black Arms to Hold You Up, it's set in the summer of 2020, that moment in American history that should be more permanent and is being rolled back right now. I don't need to ask about why 2020, but to you, what was the impetus to put this book, put ink to paper for you?
Yeah. Well, as you said, 2020 was in a lot of ways a turning point, and I think it's one of those times, at least in my adult life, where something historic was happening and I knew it at the time, So here where I live in Philadelphia, we had a similar kind of uprising as there was in other places for about 3 days. And, I was out in the streets. I did a little comic about some interactions I had during the time. And when I got home, you know what I mean? I felt like it was important to both personally and also artistically reflect on what had come before. In a lot of ways, I think, people would sort of talk about these, for lack of a better word, sort of like explosions, right? These sort of eruptions of both Black ire, but also aspiration, right? And they sort of talk about these things as these outliers, whereas, the history in this country of our people is one in which these sort of insurrectionary, anti-colonial sort of often called, sort of violent responses to our oppression are very, very common, and there's a long tradition. I even had, during the uprising here, I had a whole conversation with a kid, and people could read the comic on the Nib as the riot is going. Me and this kid are having a conversation about sort of the phenomenology of violence, of political violence. So yeah, I really just had to write the book, honestly, after 2020 sort of happened.
I think that the way that you constructed the book book as a dialogue between yourself and your father, as it were, and a run through history. Can you take our listeners, our watchers, through how the book is constructed? Because I think that it is more than just stepping through the looking glass, kind of thing. The present tense of these uprisings. I think you bring it forward very clearly here.
Yeah, I wanted, basically what happens is that during the uprising, I am at home, just sort of watching the video of Philando Castile being murdered in 2016. My father comes in and he's basically getting at me for not being outside, any viewer obviously is understanding that this is not really me, right? It's maybe a version of me. And I did it that way because it would allow me to do a few things, but one is to sort of speak to someone who is very, very common, someone who is a bit detached and nihilistic feeling and unaware of where we come from. And so my father is basically like, I need you to know where you come from, right? So he takes me through, by way of hitting me over the head with a book, Carnival of Fury, that's about Robert Charles. And he sends me on this trip over 100 years of history, starting in 1900. Robert Charles, who fought 10,000 white police, military, and racist farmers that were trying to lynch him. It goes through a little bit of Marcus Garvey, then Robert F. Williams. We meet Asada. We meet a bunch of the people involved in the Republic of New Africa. So it's sort of, in some ways, I'm trying to link figures and movements that are often like a bit separated. Garvey and the Republic of New Africa are sort of often connected, but I'll talk about Robert F. Williams, who I think is more associated with the civil rights movement, even though he was the president of the RNA briefly. There's kind of chapter titles, but I really wanted things to flow into each other, because that's a bit of how it was. There was a lot of overlap. Figures who were involved in one thing became figures later. For instance, Queen Mother Moore was in New Orleans, and she was part of an armed demonstration to force the city government to let Marcus Garvey speak. And then she later became a significant member of the Republic of New Africa. So I wanted everything to feel like very current, very present, very active. And I wanted everyone to feel very grounded. That was something that really stood out to me while I was researching the work, and also in the opportunities I've had to meet revolutionaries who are still alive. These are very knowable people. These are just, regular people, and they're us, and for me, that was really important for me to sort of recognize parts of myself in these, in comparison, much braver, smarter people than me, but they are very knowable people.
It's interesting because as a reader of a lot of books for kids, books for adults, graphic novels, comics, you approach a story about Black America, and it's going to have a big section on Dr. King. It might have a smaller section on Malcolm X. It might have a mention or two of something as big as the Black Panthers. And yet there's one or two pages in here about those central figures of many of the other narratives that come out, many of the storytelling that comes out about the Black American experience. And you, I think, have done something very brave here, which is to tell a true story that isn't being told very, very widely or loudly. Those other stories tend to get picked up. I mean, heck, they, T-shirts and baseball caps even.
Yeah, and I think I did that for a couple reasons. One, it felt important, as you said, to write about something that people often don't write about in a very accessible way. There's a lot of material you can read about, like, say, the BLA, right? They, Jalil Muttaqin and Sundiata Akoli, like, they have written quite a bit, and you can go on like the Freedom Archives or other places and read them. But in terms of like an accessible medium like comics, there's not a lot about a lot of the people I wrote about. Like Sonika Shakur is not written about widely, really anywhere. So I thought that they were important enough to write about, but also, as you said, we're sort of inundated, more or less with, the Panthers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and these are important people.
Hmm.
I think in some ways we're meant to think that these people are unusually significant, and that we should constantly search for that person again if we want to do anything. And I think in a lot of ways that serves to sort of demobilize people from, building their own freedom. But also I think a lot of people think they already understand who these people are. So in a lot of ways, I thought it would be more advantageous if I wrote about more obscure figures, because people would be going in blind. They'd be like, I don't know, you know what I mean? I haven't made a decision about these people. So I felt like they would be, hopefully the reader is sort of more receptive because they don't really know that much.
Hmm. That's fascinating. So in in the book, you've got a section at the back, which I appreciate very much, as somebody who might be for the first time coming to meet these folks, that I've never heard of them before, even though I pride myself on being somebody who pays attention, and I appreciate the bibliography back here, because in those 5 sections that you did, because it does point the way to further learning and discussion. But how did the research that you had to do shape your art? This is a beautifully rendered piece, and your color palette, by the way, it's really stark, folks. It's black, it's white, it's red, and I'm not suggesting that there aren't any other colors anywhere, but that's my takeaway, my feeling about it. How did the research shape your approach to this as art?
Yeah, well, I think anyone who try to research anything, you immediately become an obsessive, right? And all these details become really, really important. And in the medium of comics, that's deadly. You can't really include most of the things you end up researching. Something that I thought a lot about that feels very maybe relevant to libraries is for a lot of these people, the written word was really important. For Robert Charles, the newspapers, the Immigration Society magazines were really, really huge. Much later, there's television, there's music. So in a lot of ways, I wanted the art to sort of like recreate, at many points, is sort of like recreating ways that people are receiving information. Let me think. I think like, talking about the color, it is, it's black, it's white. There's a coral red, I call it. And then there's like tones of gray. There's a couple of reasons why I chose to do that. One reason was that I wanted to sort of to add this feeling that like everything is happening all at once. Like everything is contemporary time, right? It's like, we sort of associate black and white with the old stuff, and then you sort of expect as things get, more current, it gets into color. But I thought, if everything was more or less the same, we'd accept it, right? As just sort of like, okay, we're in it. And, my character is experiencing things, as it's happening, So that had something to do with it. There's a lot more flexibility, you know what I mean? If we reduce the colors, I've done limited palettes for a couple different works for that reason. That as just an artist, it's an interesting challenge to try to sort of show like different time periods and stuff like that, different times of day, different temperatures with just like a limited tool set, In terms of the research, I think one thing I just had to accept was, there's a lot of information I wasn't going to get down. I wasn't going to be able to tell everyone's full stories. I chose to depict significant moments that I thought were sort of emblematic of the characters themselves, rather than trying to tell their entire story. I think the closest I get is to Robert Charles in the first chapter, where I talk a little bit about his early life and then mostly depict his shootout. But with like Asada Shakur, I selected like 5 moments, when she's a little girl on the beach, when she's been harassed by local racists, when she's meeting the Garveyists, when she's like hustling in the streets of Harlem, like when she's in the Panthers. And those felt like just sort of key moments in her life that sort of defined who I felt like she was, both as a person and also like as to help the reader sort of understand her. So I had to do a lot of things to sort of work around the fact that I only had 200 pages, which is a lot of pages in one sense, and basically no space at all in another.
The The other thing that I think the limited palette did for me as a reader was the red skeletons. And not to give too much away to our listeners and watchers today, but they got to pick up this book. The at a certain point there was a lot of red skeletons.
Yeah, there was a lot of red skeletons. They one theme that I really want to push through is sort of this idea, and it's kind of woo, and it's something that I really believe in, is this relationship we have to our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I think a lot of what was important to me is like a person who was trying to find themselves politically. I read Kwesi Balagoon's this collection he has of his writings called Soldier Story. Kwesi Balagoon was an openly queer Black anarchist who was a Panther and then later became part of the Black Liberation Army and eventually died in prison of complications related to AIDS. But I read his book, and it was sort of the first time I really recognized myself more or less in another person in history. And I was like, oh, like our sort of ideas about the world, our aspirations. And I really felt his presence in that moment of reading it. And I felt like, you know, like something that I've noticed, you know, and Asada is certainly a really good example of that. She really holds her ancestors really dear. She holds her elders dear. That's like a common, you know, relationship that Black folks have in their own community. This respect for elders, this connection to ancestry. It's something we get, you know, from Africa. So I wanted that theme to be really strong in the book. This sort of sense that like they are still with us, you know, they're still deep in the world. So that's why there's a lot of red skeletons.
No, I get it. I mean, so the through line here of this book is really about memory. And I think it's a really interesting reflection because stories of resistance, whether it's an armed resistance or a nonviolent resistance, but stories of resistance, you know, I was thinking about the white suburban mid-50s era guy that I am here, you know, and about the hagiography around the IRA, okay? In the Irish Republican Army, he's got, you know, folks were like, wow, yeah, let's go. You know, let's, and some people had moral support. Some people, you know, in my circles had financial support when I was a kid for the IRA. And that history of resistance is put up on a pedestal, you know, in certain circles. And yet the history of resistance, the repeated history of resistance that you talk about in the book, sometimes it's forgotten, sometimes it's buried, sometimes it's rewritten. I mean, we have a responsibility, I think, and I think you're bringing that forward to restore that history and not reimagine it.
Yeah, I agree. It's been, I think, outside of imprisonment and murder, you know, I think and exile in some cases, like the state has realized, the state and its, you know, enablers have realized that rewriting and obscuring, right, our history is been really beneficial to make sure that there's not a resurgence, right, of this kind of rebellion. I think the other thing too, and we see it in a lot of other places, is this destruction of solidarity, right? The sense that like, if you're rebelling, that removes my ability, right, to fight for my own liberation and my own needs.
Wait, say that again, because I think that you're saying something really important here.
I guess what I'm saying is that they have destroyed like a culture of solidarity. That and something that you're saying about the IRA that really sticks out to me is that the IRA spoke to the fact that Irish within this country, you know, enacted and co-signed systematic racism in this way that the IRA themselves could not understand because they were in solidarity with the Panthers, right? Mm-hmm. We've seen over and over that so many rebellious Irish, you know, it's complicated over there right now around immigration, but you know, at many points, you know, you'll see the IRA, to just keep it on them, have expressed a strong recognition of rebels in other, you know, in other colonized spaces.
Yeah, there was a legitimate movement towards the solidarity across the struggles. Yes.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's really important to our oppressors to make sure that we forget that we can fight alongside each other, right? And I think in that way, I chose to focus on our struggles specifically because, right, it's not a history that people recognize. It's something that I think is really, really important. But something that I don't really talk about in the book very much, but was really significant to a lot of these people, is that they understand themselves as part of an international struggle in which solidarity is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
That it's materially necessary for us to like fight alongside each other and understand and recognize each other as people who are seeking liberation, not over one another, right? But you know, in solidarity.
So the book, I want to just check in with you real quick. One more thing about you as a creator. Excuse me. When you bring out the humor, it is. I mean, it's sardonic. It is sarcastic, but it's also a very interesting creator's perspective. And in Your Black Friend, that whole. I mean, the little video that you did a couple years ago. That's all. The tongue is firmly in cheek, you know, and
Right.
it's not intended to dispel the seriousness of the work, but you have a particular, I think, a particular humorist's approach to this.
Yeah. I think you know, over time I've tried to figure out like how it functions as a tool. You know, it's initially just a coping mechanism, but I think with this book, the worry I had was that it was going to come off as disrespectful. But I think something that I try to do is I try to ground the people that I'm writing about. And I also try and take away sort of like how do I say it? Something I've been thinking a lot about that you know, I don't know how to talk about it in this space, but like I think in some ways we've been led to believe that fascists are really cool. They're like really evil, but they're like really smart and like really technologically, you know, adept.
Mm-hmm.
And when in fact what we're realizing is that they're not smart at all, and in fact they don't have to be. They're just in power. You know, their cruelty maybe is the advantage that they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their lack of imagination, right? Their lack of empathy, and I think in that way. I try to use humor in different ways to sort of like disarm this sort of the vision of power, you know, when I'm depicting it.
So you make me think about two criticisms that I have for. Well, one of them is for the science fiction community. You know, like who wants to cosplay being a stormtrooper? You know, and yet there's a lot of folks who do, and it's not an anti-hero situation. That is cosplaying the Empire. You know. Yeah. And what does the Empire do besides stand on a neck, you know? The other thing that comes to mind is who the devil would want to cosplay the Confederate side, no offense, in Civil War reenactors, you know?
Right, yeah.
I'm reminded of a stand-up comedian I saw one time who said that one of the great white allies that goes underappreciated is the white ally who plays the bad guy in a story about Black liberation. You know?
Yeah.
Like, what the hell's wrong with us, though? Cosplaying the Confederates.
Yeah, well, I think this sort of plays in a little bit of this idea that is so strange but really prevalent in this country. There's a bit of this veneration of not being political, you know, that like somehow you're like sort of above it all. You're just a normal, you know, whatever, a normal Joe if you're not political. When like being political is, I mean, that's just everyday life, you know, like you're always making political choices. That's not a debasement, you know what I mean? It's an opportunity to sort of think about the continuity that your life is in. And I think in this way too, it's like it's very American to sort of think about your history beginning maybe with your parents, but maybe not even, and just sort of ending with you or ending with your kids. When in fact, like the long view is, you know, something I've been thinking about a lot ever since it happened is the sort of the conversation that was happening between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein, and something that Ta-Nehisi Coates was talking about. He was talking about how he is part of a tradition of people who fight knowing that they are more than likely never going to see the fruits of their labor, you know, and that is deeply true for everyone I wrote about in the book. You know what I mean? Regardless of their intentions. You know, the practicality of what they wanted to do, or their moralism or their morals as like a person, you know what I mean? They all put it on the line for a world they knew they weren't going to see, you know? And that's just sort of the reality of being a political person. You pick up the baton for as long as you can carry it, and then you drop it. But there's sort of this fantasy, this sort of like weird American fantasy that no, in fact, like you just should build your empire, and not worry about the past so much and who you are in terms of your people. You know what I mean? Even fascism, right? It has to rely on myths of the people, right? It's not about the actual history,
Yeah, that's fascinating. The present tense that you're trying to bring to this book to make sure that everybody understands that the resistance is not over, and yet it's always being renewed, and yet that present tense of the non-political actor, the present tense of the myopia, those coexist in the American conversation. I think that you're doing something here with this book that really will resonate with that broader conversation about race, about protest, and about artist activism. Ben, this is a great work. Can I ask you two more questions as we wrap up? One is the book asks the question of what is left to fight for, and I know that there's a lot to fight for. But after spending so much time in this history of resistance, what's your answer to your own question?
I think for me, the fight that started, that starts with the book, this idea of freedom, right? A place in which people can be liberated. That's still the thing that I feel committed to, and it's disconnected, right, from any sort of like patriotism, it's about a people that I am from, that I am of, and then that's enough. I think something that I was just talking to someone about, it's like, it's not really about me going to a utopia. You know what I mean? It's a question of like, who do you want to be in this moment? Who do you want to be to other people? And who I want to be is brave. You know what I mean? I want to be fighting for freedom, even though I know, the odds are not good, but I have, to bolster me, a tradition of people who made that choice before me.
Mm-hmm. So the hope that any writer has for the reader. Let me have you end with that. This is a challenging book. I mean, if you don't know the history, whether it's your own history or the history of America, it's a challenging book, not only because your limited color palette, is psychoactive on the brain, but it's a challenging book because of what it says about the fact that violence does have a space, if not a place, in the political conversations. I mean, what's your hope for your reader?
Yeah, I mean, Robert F. Williams would say the violence is as American as apple pie. I think, the violence is present. At the end of the book, right, a character decides to use the books in a very material way and throw them. I think that what I wanted was for people to just be curious and to do something with their curiosity. And part of that is reading, right? Don't just end at my book, but also like go outside, go outside and use that knowledge and passion to enact, to engage in this tradition, right? If it's not your people's tradition, your people has one that works in concert with this one, So that's my sincere hope, that it doesn't just end with, okay, I read this, so now I know everything I need to know about Sneak Shakur. No, you should certainly go and read his book, Struggle Forward, read his book, Monster. But then he himself will tell you, you got to get outside. You got to go out and use it. For me, it's like, dreams are whatever. It's just a fantasy unless you fight for it,
Ben Passmore, Black Arms to Hold You Up, folks. Pantheon is the publisher. That's a bold choice there. Thank you for bringing this conversation to us today here in EveryLibrary, and the idea that we're not able to stop. I want to listen to that from you today in a special way. So, Ben, thanks for being part of this.
I appreciate it.
And folks, if you are watching this live, thank you. If you're watching this on a recording, thank you. But stay with us on EveryLibrary's Facebook and YouTube for more award winners this week, and about 2.5 or 3 years worth of great conversations with other authors, illustrators, narrators, publishing professionals. Again, Ben, thanks for being part of this today. Cheers.
Absolutely. Peace.